Hey guys, welcome back to JP Podcast, episode 11. Today we have Richard Battle on. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having us, George.
Richard is an author, speaker, and advisor, I would say. You have a great history of entrepreneurship and consulting, 40 years in the business world, 30 years in public speaking, and have served on a judicial committee, have author of 11 books, Christian, incredible stories. Shane let me know a couple of them, and we're excited to have you on the podcast today. So for those of you guys that want to learn more about entrepreneurship, leadership, being an author, life, wisdom, it's going to be a great show. So thank you for being on.
Well, it's my pleasure, George. Thank you so much for having us.
So for the audience who doesn't know you, just give us a little bit of a background on who are you and how'd you get to this point in your life?
Well, and how I got to this point is important because the person I am today is not the person I was. Hopefully the person I am tomorrow and the day after will be even better, because I think our only competition is against who we are today. Going forward, I'm not trying to compete against anybody else in the world. I'm just trying to be better myself. I went to the University of Texas, got a business degree, went into the corporate world with Fortune 500 companies, worked with 3 Fortune 500 size companies, some private, some public, promoted to management with all 3. Started out as a territory sales rep in Austin, Texas, and then completed my corporate career. I say I'm a reformed corporate executive with a C-level corporate sales management, running a business with international responsibilities. And I loved all that, but I wanted to impact people more and longer and in a broader sense than I was able to do in the corporate world. And thankfully I had the resources to be able to step aside and focus entirely on the speaking and authoring, trying to inspire people to win every day.
What was what do you think about you wanted to impact people more? Was that something you always had as like a child? Was that something you saw your mom and your grandmother? I know we talked a little bit about them. Was it something that there was a lack of and you wanted to be inspired or guided? What about that call to you?
Well, I think ever since I was a kid and was involved in the first volunteer type opportunity and saw people impacted by other people, I've always had a heart for trying to help others. And whatever fashion it is. In the business world, I had very much a coaching style to try not to focus as much on the present production as growing people so they could be more successful over time and impact their families better and impact businesses better than the current. And that's still the focus now. It's the impact on people. And I believe Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said, "A man's mind once stretched by a new idea can never return to its previous dimension." And so anytime we get an idea, it's life-changing for us and all of those we impact today and influence generations beyond our lifetime. And so to me, that's what's great is when I see light bulbs go off when people get new ideas and then watch them take those ideas and sprint to more success and impact themselves. It's a force multiplier, to use a term that's in vogue today.
So what was your first volunteer operation or
well, I think
it was your community? Was as a child?
Well, and I probably had some then, but my memory only goes back to the high school and the Key Club, which is kind of tied to the Kiwanis Club and doing community service type projects at that time. Going back to that.
Got it.
And then some of the first leadership opportunities I ever had were in nonprofit, in a business fraternity I was in at the University of Texas. It was the first chance I had to serve as president of an organization. And that's life-altering because the hardest one to serve in is the first one because you don't have any perspective to rely on. You have to learn the first one, and once you do that, that opens the door to serve in an executive or president capacity in many other organizations.
And you mentioned your leadership style was more of a coaching versus management. How would you define the two different coaching styles?
Well, my style of coaching is always trying to improve the person for the next opportunity. So, for example, if I was working with a sales rep and making a sales call, making that deal is important, but more importantly to me afterwards, I'd like to sit down and discuss what happened, like analyzing game film in sports. Okay, how did this work? What could we do better? What's a couple of other tactics or strategies we could employ next time that might help? So I wanted each experience to broaden that person's skill sets for more success in the future. And to me, that's better than just managing a person where you're not focused on their growth, because I don't believe they'll ever reach their potential without that. And second, I believe when you're coaching someone, they know you care about them. It's not just the numbers and the company success. They know you care about them personally, and that's very important.
There's a saying that we use often. It says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and you were talking about, tying into that point, you were talking about the motivators because you've done a lot of nonprofit work.
Yes.
Based on what you just said in terms of your philosophy on developing that person to be the best that they are, and then being in nonprofit where you can't use, you talked about income, right, and job security.
Correct.
So can you share a little bit more about that on leading people outside of having, in the volunteer space, you don't have the job security because it's volunteer, and you don't have income. How do you lead people in that volunteer space?
No, that's exactly correct. And as I mentioned, I can spot somebody who's had volunteer leadership success versus someone who manages a business who's never had that. People who've never had it will only rely on income and job security for motivating factors, and that only takes people so far. People who have led volunteer organizations successfully realize you don't have those two motivators. So you have to come up with something else. And the first thing you have to recognize is everyone's unique. So you can't have a one-size-fit-all program, because that doesn't motivate everybody. So you have to understand your people and what motivates them, and then try to find those opportunities that you can put in front of them to reach for that will help them achieve maximum success.
What are the different motivators that you've seen in that? Because we run an independent contractor-based sales organization. Yeah. So all of our guys, they don't get a salary for working here. You know, they're 100% commission, 1099 guys. They're building their own book of business. They're building their own agency. So there's an aspect of it that's like volunteer leadership. But in your experience of leading volunteers, what are the things that you've seen people are most motivated or driven by?
Well, and I think that's a great question, and some of it can be business-wise as well. I worked several years straight commission also, and so the best part about that is it made me think like an independent business person, not an employee. So everything I did, I looked at, I'm running my business. The company only handles giving me a check. And so the same thing in the volunteer. Recognition's number one. But that can vary also how you recognize people. Helping them to achieve some goal they have outside of just a production. Involving their families. One of the unique things in a volunteer group, I used to give out T-shirts for achievements for recruiting members. And it was interesting because I'd have people come up to me that were new, and they'd say, how do I get one of those? And so it doesn't matter what it is, it has to be something somebody decides they want. And normally it can be something we create and they end up wanting, and then we help show them how they can attain it by producing more for overall success for themselves and the organization. We've done things such as a pie in the face contest for recruiting members, for example. So you can make it fun, and it's especially fun if the executive is involved and there's an opportunity to be humble and self-deprecating and let people have access to you while you're doing this, and they can have fun and grow as well. And then since they're independent like that, that can be a pretty lonely business model, because even if they're coming to an office and associating with people, they're basically independent business people, and so they feel that pressure differently than if they're an employee, I believe. And so that makes it more important to really understand the individual and what motivates them and what they're looking to achieve. And then the question is, how do I help them do that?
And then from bringing people together that are all volunteers, they're individually motivated, but in terms of how do you get them to be motivated as a whole?
Well, I think that's a great question too, because that's a team building exercise. And I had one of the greatest examples of that in my life in the Junior Chamber of Commerce in Austin years ago. And what I found was we had 600 people involved, and we ran all these projects in the community. And when we sat back and looked at it, we found that the sum was greater than the total of the parts. It's called synergy. And so when you get people pulling the same direction for a singular goal, then, and you help show them how their contributions attain that goal. And what you'll find is they will be amazed, and you'll be amazed because you'll achieve more than you ever thought you could. And that is one of the most encouraging and creates more optimism about your future than anything else, is when you wake up and you go, gosh, we did more than I ever thought we could. That means we can do more even next time. And that's exciting.
That makes sense. What was your first book that you wrote? I know you've written 11, so.
Well, the first one, and I tell people that my high school English teachers never dreamed I'd read a book, and I never dreamed I'd write a book. And so after having this success in the Junior Chamber, for 6 years, they'd have a weekend retreat to train the officers for the next year. It was statewide in Texas. They'd bring in people from every community. And I trained the presidents of the largest cities, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin. And it'd be a day-and-a-half course in how to run a volunteer organization. And what I noticed after about the third of those 6 years was the people coming in who had served as vice president the previous year had not been taught anything I taught their predecessors. And so I discovered, well, if they're not teaching them that, maybe I ought to put it into a book format that can be shared so that those people can be trained. And we see that in business a lot of times too, where some managers are not as good at training people as others. And you get what I call the go get 'em Bubba training. Basically, it's, here's your price book and products, and go get 'em Bubba, and you better make your number.
Yeah.
So that's not sufficient for a successful organization.
So it was a book on how to lead a volunteer organization.
Yes. So it included personnel management and all kinds of different tactics to try to run an organization more successfully.
What were the main aspects of the book?
Well, and that's interesting because I wrote that in 1988, and the one thing I haven't updated was the technology side, because at that time there was very little personal computing. I had a little laptop that I still have, but mostly it was manual processes. And so, but the personnel management was the same. And so how to motivate people, how to work with non-performers and get non-performers to produce, things of that type nature, how to recruit people, how to communicate, things of that type nature.
Just the fundamentals are always the fundamentals.
Yes.
So how do you motivate a non-performer? Like, because we have some non-performers in our business.
Yes. Well, we do in every organization. There's always non-performers, and so one of the first things we have to figure out is why. What's going on? And a lot of times it's something's going on in the family, distracting them from their business. Something, and then the question is it something I can help with as their supervisor, yes or no? Or is it not a fit in the business? Maybe they should be in a different business. So it's almost like if you're coaching a baseball team and you throw somebody at shortstop and they can't throw to first base, for example. So you have to figure out, are they a fit for the organization and that spot? Should they be in a different spot in the organization? Should they not be in the organization? Would they be more successful somewhere else? I've led salespeople, for example, that I've seen be top salespeople in one organization and fail in a second organization. Wow. Both the times I supervised them both times. And it was because the products were different and the sales channels and the sales tactics were different, and they weren't able to adapt to it. So investigating that and trying to figure out what's really going on is important, because it's easier to try to save somebody and turn them around than it is to start with somebody new, because you not only have the cost and the time, but you take a risk. You may hire somebody at the same spot or worse. So if you can save somebody, it's always better. And if you save somebody, their gratitude for that is always off the charts personally. They become very aligned with you personally. And generally people leave companies because they leave managers. They come to companies because of companies, but managers usually drive them away. So is it me as a manager? Is there something I'm not doing or am doing I shouldn't be doing?
That goes back to the difference between managing and coaching. It keeps going back to that lane.
Yes.
And you said something that was important, investigating. I don't think a lot of leaders want to take the time, because investigation requires an investment of time, thinking, getting to know the person. And you also said that the first thing that you said was personal lives, in terms of what's going on outside versus just focusing on what's the problem in the business. It may be external. I know that you've been through some challenges in life, cancer, death of your only son, divorce. A lot of those things any one of those could absolutely destroy a person, take them down a path that they don't come back from. Can you talk about your spirit, your mindset of going through your most challenging moments in your life?
Yes, and obviously the loss of my son was the hardest. And that was the second book I wrote, Surviving Grief by God's Grace, about the faith walk and my belief that God saved me through that. And I believe, first, I don't grieve where my son is. I grieve where he isn't. He's not with me. So that helps me handle it better. But one of the things I learned from that experience was, so often when we suffer adversity, any kind of adversity, the two words people ask is, why me? And I don't believe that's the right question, because I think it focuses on self only. It focuses on the past only. And I believe God is in our present and future. He's already left the past. And so I believe the right question to ask is, what now? What am I supposed to learn from this event that I can use to help myself and others in the future? And I believe God's in our present and future, and He's there to help us get through that. And people that ask, why me, get stuck in the past until they can overcome that. And if you're stuck in that past saying, why me all the time, you can't progress, because you can't accomplish anything positive with a negative attitude. So whereas when you're positively looking for something out of that, you can grow and become better. Now also, my hope is I learn one lesson for one adversity. I hope I don't have to have one lesson from two adversities or three adversities or four. In other words, I want to know, what am I supposed to learn? Because adversity is bad enough. I don't want to have to go through it. But I have to say that every one I've been through has helped me to become better because of that formula, and I ascribe it all to God, not me. I think He's helped me through that to position me to be a better servant to Him.
I think about my son, and I just think about, like, if that was to ever happen, I don't think I could get through it. So when and I think there's people that go through a lot of hardships.
Yeah.
When that happens, what was the process for you to go from that loss? It's the worst loss I think anybody can ever experience, to that. Because did you already have your faith? Was that something you were strong in? Because I would be like, I think I would be like, how are you God and you didn't take care of my son?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where you differentiate having theoretical faith versus experiential faith. And when you have theoretical faith, you believe in everything, but if you haven't been tested, you don't know for sure. And that experiential faith, once you have that, it makes you more solid for anything else that comes. And we have a choice when adversity strikes. Do we get closer to God or further away? And I would rather get closer, because I believe, based on Scripture, that He loves us and is looking out for our best interest. But in this world, we're going to experience hardships. And so if we're going to experience them, it's best for us to learn something that can help him going forward. Now, my former wife at the time, the way she grieved was she wanted to do projects around the house, paint, remodel, do all kinds of different things. That was not my style. My style was reading scriptures, reading books about the loss of children, journaling what I was going through. And so the lesson I learned there is you have to grieve as a couple in that situation, but you also have to respect the difference of each other in individually grieving as well. And so those three things happened, in about 5 months after that loss. I had a couple at church who lost a son, and I shared with them the things that I had learned, and they said, you really should write that in a book and put it out, because you can help other people.
Wow.
And so that's been 20 years now since that book's been out, and I still have people contact me and say how that's helped them.
What's the name of the book?
Surviving Grief by God's Grace. And I go through there and show the scriptures that helped me, the things I learned. One of the things I learned was it can always be worse. I had a guy that I served with in the State Guard. I had my experience. I was talking to him. He said, yeah, I lost 3 kids in one night in a house fire. So that was worse than me losing 1. So it can always be worse. And if we think like that versus woe is me, we will be better emotionally for ourselves and all those people that rely on us.
So you leaned into your relationship with God instead of away from it.
Yes. Another analogy I use is kind of humorous. I'll tell people about my progression. It's like I'm walking with God, and when I started out, I didn't have his hand, and I'm out running around looking at the trees and the snakes and different things, and God goes, watch out, that snake will bite you. Or watch out, that tree's going to fall on you. Or watch out, you're going to fall off that cliff. And I'm just swerving around doing my own thing, and I've got all this risk of problems happening. And then as I progressed in life, I got where I would hold God's hand and walk with him, but then every once in a while I'd pull away just like a little kid and then run do the same things. Well, now what I try to do is, it's like when you're a little kid, if you ever did this, where you get on your dad or your uncle's leg and you sit on their foot and you wrap your arms around their leg and they walk around with you sitting on their foot. That's what I'm trying to do now. I'm trying to wrap my arms around him and stay as close as I can.
And that was, you also said your wife at the time, she went more into projects.
Yes.
Do you think that was just her saying, I can't handle this pain, I want to distract myself? Or do you think it was her therapy while she was going through it?
That was her therapy. That was her style. And it just shows that we're all individuals. And so I had to respect that and help on that, even though I didn't like it that much. And she had to respect what I was doing individually, and then we had our grief together as well.
Did you guys have that understanding beforehand, or you went through that challenge together?
Well, I think we went through it. I don't think we ever dreamed we'd have to face something like that. And so we weren't 100% prepared, except from a theoretical standpoint.
And I meant more. I understand that. I meant more in. Did you have that understanding of? Probably not, because you've never had that level of grief.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Okay, and then you went through cancer.
Yeah, I had later, and from Halloween 2016 to August 9th, 2017. That's 10 months. I experienced a divorce, 2 heart procedures, and a cancer diagnosis.
Say that again. So
divorce.
From the time frame again. It was
October 31st, Halloween 2016, to August 9th, 2017.
Okay.
Divorce, 2 heart procedures, and a cancer diagnosis. And so those were challenges too. The loss of my son helped me with those, as you can imagine, and my faith helped me with those. And so I wrote a book called unwelcome opportunity because of that, and how the faith-based walk to go through that. Because again, the tendency is to think, why me? Why am I having to go through all this? Well, we all suffer in life. And if we live long enough, we're all going to suffer and experience it. The question is, how do we handle it, and what do we do from it? And so my previous experience helped me with that. And that particular book, I'm trying to help others experience adversity and overcome it, whatever it is.
And how did you? So you went through a loss. You got closer to God. Now in that 10-month period, you go through cancer, heart procedures, and divorce.
Yeah.
Were there new lessons that you learned through that?
Well, yes, because we go through every adversity. There's lessons like that. I got deeper into Scripture. I got closer to people, because it made me realize that everyone in life goes through different challenges. So unless we know somebody's story, we don't know what they're going through. So sometimes it's easier for us to look at somebody and maybe we think a negative thought because we don't know of what they're experiencing. And so going through that variety of experiences in such a short time really made me think about things like that, and how important it was for me to transition to a mission of impacting more people.
Yeah, I think when you go through pain, you become more empathetic.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Yes.
And was the difference of why me when you went through cancer? Because that's something that my mom had cancer. She had breast cancer, double mastectomy, chemo. She survived, I thank God.
Yeah.
But not everybody does.
No.
And then people that go through cancer, that is the question that they ask, why me?
Well, that is the question. That's not the question I ask anymore because of what I learned and experienced, but it is. I'm a believer as long as we have breath, whether we're a year old or 100 years old, we're here to glorify Him and fulfill His purpose for us. And I believe this is kind of the training ground for eternity. And so the more we do here, the better we'll be there. And so I'm trying to be more in tune with what I'm supposed to be doing so I can impact more people. And I can look back, every success I've ever had in life, I can see His hand. Every shortcoming or failure, however you want to describe it, I can see me alone. I don't see Him in it. I just see me doing something by myself. And so it makes me want to counsel and listen and obey more than I might have done earlier.
Okay. How do you help people that are going through that, not ask that question?
Well, I try to relate to them, and I'll usually have a board where I'll draw a line, and I'll show the why me on one side and the what now on the other, and I'll try to do it graphically to display it. And I do it as an offer to help somebody. I don't just say, here's what you ought to do. I say, here's something that helped me go through the experience. And I think I've gotten great responses from people because once they look at that and they go, oh yeah, they can recognize people. And you probably know people who've experienced hardship and they're still in that why me phase and they never get out of it and they never grow. And that's the saddest thing. Their lives are trapped as long as they stay in that focus.
Can you walk me through that line? You say, why me on one side and what now?
Yes, and so you just take a straight line across, and so the tendency is to say, why me? And why me's focused on self. You're only thinking about yourself. It's focused on the past because you're focused on what happened in the past, and God isn't there. And again, this is my belief. God's moved on to the present
So
and
self,
the future.
past, and absence of God.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I appreciate you letting me clarify that. So across the line, we come to the present and the line going to the future. So we ask the question, what now? What am I supposed to learn? Well, I believe that focus is not only on ourselves, but it focuses on who we can help going forward. And it gives us a positive attitude going forward. And I believe God's there to help us in the present and future to achieve His will. And His will is for us to follow His, obey His direction from Him to us, And normally that direction's helping other people in some way. I think we can look at anything in life and figure out a way to help other people while we're doing it.
Yeah. So you help them focus on using their pain to encourage or guide somebody else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so through this process, you've written 11 books.
Yes.
What I've heard just from our story today and our questions is that every time you have a significant event in your life, it becomes a book.
It has. I have other books as well, thankfully, but they're all inspired. Every book has a story behind it, because, like I say, I never dreamed I'd write one book, much less 11. And so every one has been some idea that's come up, so I can try to share something to help other people where they're at.
Okay. And you were talking about your personal mission in life.
Yes.
Can you share that with us?
Well, I think my personal mission is through whatever medium, whether it's this, writing, speaking live. I do 170 or so radio and TV shows a year. And so I think my mission is to communicate positive, timeless messages that will help people win every day. That's the synthesis of it.
And you were saying the difference between, some people say succeed every day and you say win every day.
Yes.
What's the difference for you?
Well, one of the things I do every day, I'll pray in the morning, thankful for the day and pray for things. But at the end of the day, and this was different than in my corporate life, at the end of the day, last thing I do is I'll sit and review the day and think, wow, I was able to get this, and this done because of God's help. Some of them were planned, and some of them were things that came up during the day that I didn't plan. But I can see progress based on His help with me every day. And back when I was in the corporate world, I think I was more focused on goals and not looking to Him as much and not being as grateful as often as I hope to be now. And because it was this, give me the goal and let's go get it. And so I relied too much on myself, and I don't think we're as successful as we can be, not only for ourselves but helping others doing that.
And how would you tell somebody that's like this to at the same time be like this while they are focused on the goal? Because I experienced that, hey, we have a goal.
Yes.
And I'm balancing, being a husband, a father of
yes.
2, about to be 3 under 3, and leadership responsibilities, family responsibilities with my siblings and parents.
Yes.
How do you balance that out better of being in the game and at the same time having perspective?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm going to segue into a story I mentioned before we started about I believe each of us will impact 100 years from now and beyond, and I think I can prove it, and I wish we could do the picture of it, but I inherited a table from my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side. And my mother used to tell me stories about how my great-great-grandmother would serve refreshments to my great-grandmother and her little friends.
So your
great-grandmother served on this table refreshments to my great-grandmother. Now, my great-grandmother lived until I was 9 years old, so I had a relationship with her. And so after my mother passed, I was going through her things, and I found 2 things. And I was a typical Texas boy. She'd tell me 100% in this ear, 99.9% came out this ear. Thankfully, 1/100% stayed. And so I found a picture of my great-grandmother when she was a teenager, 14, 15 years old, which was the time this would have been talking about. And then one of the things they did at that time was they'd have little autograph books. And so when a friend came over, you'd have them sign, it's like a guest book, mementos. And when I opened that up and looked, the writings in there were from 1884.
Wow.
And so I got to thinking about it, and I thought, wow, my great-great-grandmother was an influencer, well beyond when anybody ever thought of that term. And she taught my great-grandmother on that table, who taught my grandmother, who taught my mother, who taught me, who I've now taught my daughter, 6 generations over 140 years. And so I don't know anything specific. I just have to know that things my mother taught were passed down through those generations. That table to me is a physical manifestation of that I can put my hands on. But I'll bet you and anybody else that we walk into has the same experience. And so if we realize how we were influenced by our grandparents, great-grandparents, etc., then we realize the things we do today will have impact on our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and maybe further along the line too. And if we think that, how does that change our decision making each day? It changes mine every day. It makes me more cognizant of doing things that are timeless versus things that are just short term.
So if you believe that the things that you do will have a bigger impact than just in the now, then that makes you look at the now from a perspective of 100 years from now, or a broader perspective.
Yes.
And yeah, that makes sense. And then now your approach isn't so much on just the busyness of today, but more things that have more, I guess, significant value. Okay.
Yes. And in the sales world, it's you go out and get the deal today. Yeah, that's good. But if you do things right, then you establish lifetime relationships and you get more sales deals than just one, for example. And you're thinking about people and impact and things of that nature, and a sale becomes a byproduct, not the ultimate goal. And when you have those other facets, then it'll make you more successful on the sale, because people will feel closer to you. And the first thing that has to happen before you make a sale is people have to trust you. And if they believe you care about them, they're going to trust you. And if they trust you, they're going to buy from you.
And manufacturing that, I don't think people can manufacture that consistently because their brain's going to focus on the sale. I think it has to be something that they evolve into a true perspective of long-term thinking in life.
Yeah.
And that's not something that most of us are necessarily taught.
Well, and when you're younger and you're less confident in your success in your chosen field, you're going to be focused more short-term until you can become confident you're going to succeed. And then you can become much more of a servant business person, and knowing that you'll succeed. I mean, I can remember the first time, the new year starts and all of a sudden you're a bum again. And you have your yearly quota that you've got to make, and you feel all this pressure. But after a few years of doing that every year, I became more confident that, yes, I will make it. It's just a matter of working the process. And once I had that confidence, then I was able to be a better person, company representative, sell more, all of those things because of that confidence from experience.
So you believe that person that's focused, that's new, they're focused on the micro of, can I make it? Can I become successful?
Yes.
I lack faith and confidence. And then once they've mastered their sales process or their industry, and they've had consistent success, and some of that fear, paranoia, anxiety, stress that dials them in to only be focused on the short term goes away, and they can have a longer term perspective.
Yes, I think so.
And then get to the others, when you get to the other side of that, and now you're coaching successful people on how to build successful organizations that you do through your speaking or through your books. What's the other side of that look like now at this season of your life?
Well, I'm trying to figure out exactly the part of that question there.
So you've had this successful career, you've written books, you've impacted people.
Yeah.
Is the main driver of your life right now? What is the main driver? Is it still continuing to make impact?
Yes, every day. And the good thing is every accomplishment gives you a confidence to get outside your comfort zone and try something else. And you won't succeed every time, you, me, anybody else, but every experience can teach us something to help us. And I failed in the 80s when the real estate economy busted, and I was a straight commission sales guy. I got my clock cleaned and lost everything, but I learned a lot from that that's helped me since. And so we want people to grow and reach and strive to be more day in, day out. And every success prepares us for that and gives us the confidence to do it. Some people will never grow out of their comfort zone, and they'll never grow and become anything more than they are today. And the analogy is back, you don't remember, but back cars used to have standard transmissions that you had to manually shift. Well, if you were an auto mechanic and that's all you knew how to repair, when those transmissions almost went away and you couldn't work on an automatic transmission, well, you worked yourself out of a job. So even an auto mechanic has to grow as products and technology grows. Everybody has to do that. And as soon as we stop growing, we sentence ourselves to wherever we're at.
Did you ever go through a season where you felt like you stopped growing, like you achieved success and life was good and you had to find a new why?
Well, I did that in the business world, and I usually had outside things and nonprofits and things to balance that. But where I'd have a particular position in the business world and do the same position for multiple years, there's limits on what you can do inside that. So to counter that, then I would do things outside, speaking, writing, volunteer, civic, other different type things to give me that feeling for growth.
Got it. And the last book the most recent book you've written talks about Americans who built America.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Americans Who Made America. This one's focused on the 18th century birth of the Republic, yes.
Okay. And what inspired you to write that?
Well, it was interesting. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Made in America by Americans, Not Americans, because I'm sick of people being discouraged. Our culture, our government discourages individuals. It tells us what we can't do. It tries to drive us to politicians who promise to give us little crumbs off the table. It wants to create mediocre people. And I believe what made this country were individuals who had dreams and went out and pursued those dreams with a can-do spirit. And there's some that are famous, some you've never heard of, but they prove that the American dream and a can-do spirit will help us succeed and have more impact than a can't-do spirit. My dad, when I was a little kid, he'd ask me to do something, and I'd say, I can't do it. And he said, can't never did anything. And so I wanted to celebrate Americans and encourage people and give them hope where they say, well, if that person can do this, I can chase my dream and do more than I'm doing now also.
And not to dive into the negative of it, why do you think the government is that way, where it's more focused on the negatives and the can'ts versus the cans? Because you would think that people want to be more positive.
And that's a sad thing in my lifetime I've seen. John F. Kennedy was an inspirational president when he wanted to send us to the moon within the decade of the 60s. Ronald Reagan was an unbelievably inspirational president for individuals. But today we rarely hear elected officials on either side of the aisle at any position talk about us. All they talk about is what the government can do and what they're going to do. And I believe some of it's converted from individual responsibility to government leaders doing constituent services, and they brag about what they're doing for the people and the money they're bringing home, and that creates more of a dependent class.
What do you think caused that shift?
I think a modification, especially since World War II, to professional politicians has done that more. The money that they make, the power that they have, instead of being part-time servant leaders, they've become career people, ruling versus serving in that area. So I believe stronger Americans make America stronger. Stronger government makes Americans weaker, in my opinion.
And do you believe that can change?
Absolutely. But we have to demand from our elected leaders that they treat us less like children and dependents and create an environment where we can go out and pursue what we want to pursue and succeed, and the government's not stepping on our neck, so to speak.
How does somebody watching this do that? Is it just more pursuing their dream and being successful?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think we have to be involved. It goes back to candidate selection and primary, the people we vote on, what kind of character they have. A lot of these people that we elect, I wouldn't hire to manage my family, for example, because they don't know how to balance a budget. They've never done anything as much as run a lemonade stand. All they've ever done is be in government. So there's a lot of things like that. To me, I want government to provide public safety and some essential services, and then get out of the way and let me live freely and have the liberty that we were given from the founding.
So you think it's more involvement of the citizens to get involved in electing?
Well,
official?
for a democratic republic, it's essential for citizens to be involved because it's self-governance. And as soon as we delegate it over to professionals, it will be on the road to despotism and tyranny. And it could be from the left or the right. But if citizens don't care enough to participate, then we won't have self-governance.
How do you create a culture for citizens to care more?
I think we have to show them what happens if they don't. And the unfortunate thing is people too often think, well, it's always been this way and it can't happen here. If you look at Venezuela and what's happened in the last 10 years or so, and they used to be one of the greatest economies in South America and free people, and they had so much oil and everything, and they went socialist, and now the people are starving and rioting, and they have all kinds of problems. And we could experience that too if we don't self-govern and keep elected officials responsible to us.
And how does somebody do that that's married, running a business, has a job, has kids involved, and they're like, I'm just so busy, I don't know where to fit that in?
Well, I think that's a great question. People that I've seen, especially since COVID, have been very discouraged. And that's what the political class wants. They want us to walk away and leave it to them. And so I tell people I'm discouraged about several things. I can't impact everything, correct? So I try to encourage people, find one thing you're passionate about and do something in that one thing, whether it's school board, city council, state government, national government, whatever it is that's of interest, just make a little bit of a difference and then try to get other people to do the same thing. And if enough of us make a difference on one thing, it'll make a difference on all things.
So find something that interests them.
Yes.
Okay. And you did that with I think Governor Perry?
Yes.
And how did you serve in that? How did you get involved in that?
Well, I was fortunate. Governor Perry, I got 2 appointments to state commissions. The first was the Texas Judicial Council, which I served on 8 years. And that was a body, I was one of 3 citizen representatives that weren't lawyers or judges. And so I was kind of the common sense guy. And the whole purpose of that organization was to try to improve the courts in Texas. And it was very educational. Then I served nearly 2 years before Governor Abbott disbanded it on the Texas Emerging Technology Fund, which was like a venture capital fund for bringing businesses to Texas, which was very interesting as well. I learned as well as being a servant leader in that capacity. So there are ways we can plug in. I mean, obviously you can write a check, you can volunteer, you can inspire others. There's a lot of different ways that we can get involved a little bit, and it doesn't have to overwhelm us with everything else we're doing.
Can you walk me through how you got into the Judicial Committee role and then your responsibility there, and how did you know what to do in that role if you hadn't done it before? Did the small chamber help you get prepared for that?
Yes, and what was interesting about it, as I say, out of about 30 people or so that would sit on that committee, including Supreme Court justices and appeals court justices and judges and lawyers and everything. Well, the 3 of us that were not lawyers, basically we would listen as they would propose things to change laws in the court system in Texas. And I would think of that as an outside person. How does that affect the everyday Texan?
Did you have experience in that, or this
Well,
was
no,
just...
it was just my business experience and
Okay.
volunteer experience and everything, because a lot of those people that were judges and lawyers didn't have any experience outside the legal system.
Got it.
So they didn't know how to do the business processes. For example, to best communicate to people, setting up filing court cases online versus filing them paper in the courthouse. So there were a lot of places that business experience came in where you didn't tell them that they were doing something that wasn't smart, but you just ask questions to say, how's this work? Can we do it this way? Have you considered this? And so it was interesting. There's a lot of opportunity for impact I had there, but there's that in other places too.
And so the experience was more from your business experience.
Yes. Yeah, as I say, a lot of elected officials we have now, they've never done anything outside of government. And so they're making laws and doing things that affect us every day, and they have less experience than a kid that's run a lemonade stand. It's true.
So, now where would you say you spend the majority of your time impacting today? Is it speaking? Is it writing?
Well, it'll fluctuate because, as I say, I do about 175 to 200 radio and TV appearances. Then I do public speaking and then writing, and so I juggle all those based on demand, basically.
So you're doing roughly one every other day.
Yeah, I did
Or-
two this morning, and some days the most I've done in a day is 6. So,
And for somebody, I'm in the process of writing my first book. I get busy and I'm like, do it tomorrow. How you've written 11, so
Yeah.
what's your process for like writing a book?
well, and first thing is any way I can be of help on that as you go forward, I'm happy to do on that or anything else. But
Thank you.
The hardest one's the first one. Just like making a sale, just like any other process, because you've not done that process from start to finish. And so you're not confident on the process. Once you do the process, and I have a template I use now on process. And so then I can take pieces of it and apply it to the process and the template, and it makes it much easier than it was early on. But if you've never completed that, you don't know the process yet.
For you at this point, is it a structured time that you're writing? Is it whenever you can? Is it just 10 minutes, 15 minutes here? Is it, hey, I turn off the world? Is it I leave for a weekend?
Well, it varies.
Okay.
It varies, and each person I know is different with this, because again, some days I don't have time to do anything creatively. Some days I can focus on that, depending on supply and demand as well. Ways I structure things I'm doing makes that easier, because I can do individual pieces and then put them together. So that's one of the things that I've learned over time as well. I have to be inspired, and sometimes I've been awakened during the cancer and heart stuff and everything. I was awakened in the middle of a night sometimes with specific paragraphs and pages of things to write. And I knew if I didn't get up and do it right then, I would lose it. I mean, it was purely inspirational. So some days I'll have that and I'll discard everything else, work on it. Other days I'll work on the other things. And
Got
the
it.
hardest thing for me is when I'm out doing radio and TV on one book. I've got another book at the publisher getting ready to pop, and then I'm working on the third book behind it, and then you're trying to remember what's in which book, and so that's the hardest part sometimes.
Got it. As we wrap up, Richard, what advice would you give to a younger version of you? Like I'm 37, I'm 38,
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
turned 38. Any advice for young entrepreneurs that you feel like 2 or 3 pieces of advice that are key?
Oh, wow. And that's a great question. I mean, I look back at the things that I've done and I appreciate them. I wish I'd have done more earlier. I wish I'd have focused on learning more earlier and serving more people earlier in different ways than I did. And that's the biggest thing to me. So any person, I'd suggest, where are you at to now? Where do you want to be tomorrow? Where do you want to be next year or 5 years? You can think about that, but what can I do today to make myself better tomorrow than I am, and start building those blocks toward that future I want to have? And you think about that in sports. You can't win a championship the first day of baseball season, but you can lose a championship earlier if you lose games on the front end. And so we can lose something by not doing the things we should in the short term, but if we do the things in the short term with discipline, we will achieve much greater success long term.
And you said, so doing more earlier and learning more earlier.
Yes.
Why do you feel like you didn't, or what do you feel stopped you?
Well, I think I've always tried to learn from every experience, but I look back and, for example, I was with some companies in the same position for several years, whereas I think if I would have been more aggressive looking to get out of those businesses and do something different, it would have broadened my experience even more than it did. So I just wish I'd have done better.
Got it. And so one of the last questions then, you said something earlier on leading your family from a biblical perspective, but
Yes.
it was your mother and grandmother
Yes.
that helped
Yes.
you introduce faith into your life.
Yes.
So I was at a church, Austin Ridge, and the pastor, he said, if you want to lead your family on God's word, but you don't know God's word, it's really hard to lead your family on that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I felt convicted. I'm like, I need to go read
Yes.
the Bible. And I used to I'm like, okay, what does God want to tell me today? And I'd open up the Bible to some accidental page and be like, no, and then I was like, man, I'm playing around with this. And as a husband, now as a father, there's a different responsibility, because you
Yes.
know that your kids, the foundation that you're giving to them is, who they're going to become. And
Yes.
so we went through listening to the Bible, and it was great from beginning to end, and there were some tough parts to go through it. And now I'm in the process of, I need to learn it more.
Yes.
What's your process like in terms of maturing in your faith and studying the Bible and getting closer to God?
Well, I think that's great. And first thing is, we'll never know as much as we want to know. And second, you can go back and read or listen to the same verse 6 months from now, and you'll get something different than you did today. That's one of the greatest things about the Word. But it's so important, I think, to study, not just read, because I've gained much more on study. One of the programs that I still listen to after 25 years is J. Vernon McGee, Through the Bible. He goes through the entire Bible in 5 years, and I've gone through it 5 different rotations with him right now listening, because I do it on the treadmill every day. And so that's one way, study in depth. One of the greatest things, I taught Sunday school, adult Sunday school for 23 years, and going through and preparing lessons to teach made me learn more than if I just sat and listened to somebody else teach it. And it forced me each week to spend some time learning about that particular event or scripture so I could teach others. And so those would be the things I would suggest people consider.
So studying versus reading, and then from there teaching it to others.
Yes, you learn more. I guarantee you there's things in your business right now that you're teaching people that work with you that when you were working by yourself, you may not have thought of, but when you became in the leadership position,
Sure.
Now you're learning things from a broader and deeper perspective than you did before. And it'll be the same thing.
And so best way of contacting you, your website is richardbattle.com.
Correct.
And then they can find your books on Amazon. And
Books are on Amazon. If you go under Richard V. Battle, we have 11 books. I think it's 8 or 9 of them are in Kindle. 6 or 7 are audio. We're just getting ready to put the latest one out on audio here in the next month or so. So other booksellers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on.
It's my pleasure.
Guys, I hope you got some value from it. Deep conversations from life to business, powerful. And, the whole idea of this podcast was to bring people that can add value to your life. And, you added some deep conversations and perspectives that I've never had anybody give to me before. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hopefully you guys will share this with other people if you feel it will be beneficial, and we'll see you on the next show, guys. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.